Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. There is a lot going on in Texas House politics. Speaker Phelan is on major defense, not only being caught in a scandal where he's using state resources to campaign for re-election, and one of his lieutenants is caught red-handed, literally lying about his impeachment vote on the same day that James Frank, now the fourth chairman to come out and publicly oppose Dade Phelan's re-election as speaker, announced his own campaign for speaker in a letter. We will overview some of the reforms that James lays out need to happen in the Texas House. We have not talked about David Cook's entrance into the speaker's race, which we will also talk about. This is a gentleman who has served, I would say, in leadership in the Texas House. He was on the calendars committee. He is a powerful member on various different committees, very influential, passes a lot of bills, and has come out and laid out why he thinks the Texas House needs new leadership as well. So the coalition against, I would say this, the coalition to reform the legislature is growing. Dan Patrick announced several interim charges that are very encouraging. Let's get to the show. We will start today's show overviewing a scandal that KHOU reported on. I will give kudos to the news station. They, in local news, you will often have some journalists that are still doing very good journalistic work. Most legacy media outlets on a local level are pretty bought and paid for. Most of them are still very far left and owned by larger corporations that are very far left. But you really do still have certain diamonds in the rough that will show up, and KHOU did a wonderful investigative report on the use of taxpayer-funded jets being used by state lawmakers to travel around for non-specific state use. Let's go to the opening clip of this report.
KHOU 11 Investigates looks into why some Texas politicians are flying on private jets.
And TxDOT owns 4 jets that are supposed to be used for official state business. But investigative reporter Jeremy Rogowski found some lawmakers using the travel perk for personal or political gain.
We went through hundreds of flight logs and social media posts and found state leaders who flew to attend family graduations, and one high-profile lawmaker who took a trip and raised thousands for his own political campaign.
Speaker of the Texas House, Dade Phelan, didn't tell the whole story when he hopped aboard a state jet after a conference in Austin.
Sellout crowd is gathered.
We found he caught a college football game in Lubbock, writing "Beautiful Day" for Wreckham versus Hookham. And he held a political fundraiser, pumping at least $37,000 into his campaign.
The main concern here is that you would want just greater transparency to the public.
Beyond transparency, there's Texas law, which says the state may not provide aircraft transportation to someone who has attended an event at which money is raised for private or political purposes.
A public official should serve the public interest.
UH professor Dan Engster is an expert on ethics and leadership.
The ethical thing to do is to use public aircraft for public purposes and to follow these regulations.
Phelan's office told us he always makes every good faith effort to remain in compliance with state law and ethics rules. But it's not just political. We found other flights that were more family affairs than official state business, like State Representative Jay Dean's trip for a meeting. It was a relative's high school graduation. On Facebook, Dean posted, "So grateful to get home for my grandson."
It was stunning to see this level of the blurring of the line between public and private.
What's more, Dean paid for the flight with campaign funds, which cannot be spent for personal use. His office defended the trip, saying taxpayers did not bear the travel costs, and at the graduation, many constituents and local officials were on hand.
This does not pass the sniff test.
Something KHOU political analyst Brandon Rottinghouse doesn't buy.
There are always going to be other constituents around, but the fact that he had family that was there, there's definitely a crossing of that line.
After the graduation, the flight log shows Representative Dean rushed back to Austin the same night. Why? He and his colleagues were needed on the House floor the next day for an historic event, the impeachment proceedings of Attorney General Ken Paxton. But we found another Texas lawmaker who flew out of town on a state jet didn't make it back.
State Rep Cole Hefner said he was going on state business when he flew from Austin to Mount Pleasant that afternoon.
The House will come to order.
But oddly enough, the official record shows him on the House floor at 1:03 while he was still in the air. So, how could he be in two places at once?
Can I ask you if you're recording right now?
We are.
Okay.
Hefner's office never gave us an explanation. But we found that supposed state business flight landed in time for his daughter's graduation.
This was a historic impeachment vote. This was something where you wanted to have members on hand. Being on the ground was critical in this period.
Perhaps that's why Representative Hefner tried to return to the Capitol. He's a registered pilot, and records show Hefner's single-engine plane took off from Mount Pleasant just after 3 o'clock and didn't arrive in Austin until 4:45, the same time as the impeachment vote.
Given these records, there's simply just no way he could have been there.
But even more odd, the record shows Hefner did vote. So what gives? Take a look. Another lawmaker reaches over to Hefner's empty desk to cast his vote. Here it is again. Hefner's not there, so his colleague punches the button.
This is called ghost voting.
Ghost voting.
Yeah.
Ridinghouse says it's actually a common practice, but usually when lawmakers need to take a call or bathroom break and briefly step away.
The rules are clear that the member has to be in the building.
Would ghost voting, in your opinion, ever be acceptable for a vote of this importance?
This was definitely the biggest vote of that session, if not the decade. And to miss it is abdication of your duties.
Period.
Now, records show taxpayers paid for Hefner's state-operated flight. The cost, more than $1,000. And back to Speaker Dade Phelan, a spokesperson told us his flight was paid by Texas Tech University donors. And while in Lubbock, the lawmaker discussed the university's legislative priorities. But again, the law says if you take a state plane and raise campaign funds on the trip, that is a no-no.
Jeremy Rogowski.
The funniest thing is that when this story broke, the first several lawmakers I talked to, and some of them have been previous supporters of Dade and some of them are not. And they will tell you, I've never used a jet. Nobody's even mentioned it to me that I should use a jet to do something. I'm sure there will be more work done to get to the bottom of just how many times this has been abused. This process, this tool that is allotted state lawmakers. It does make sense. I'll give you some examples I know of that aren't like just a personal state rep doing this, but I've known groups of lawmakers to go down to the border to have briefings with DPS to get updates on the numbers of individuals crossing or the different areas that are more secure or less secure and the consequences of an open border, right? And to see firsthand how state officials are handling the invasion. And that will often get done on a state jet where 10 lawmakers will get on the same jet and they'll fly to the border from North Texas, per se. Now, that makes sense, right? That state elected officials are going to travel to specifically talk to leaders on the border for a mission that they appropriated funds for to catch up on where it is and understand how they can better support this moving forward. That makes sense. Nobody would be upset that state lawmakers used a state-funded jet to travel down to the border to better understand the border crisis, the invasion that's going on, and what we can do to give them even additional resources that would stop the invasion. Makes sense, right? Okay. I really do want to go to the second part of this report, though, where Representative Cole Hefner is caught having never voted to impeach Ken Paxton. I'm going to start this clip with a different excerpt from an interview that Cole Hefner did with his own local television station. He actually did this in a roundtable setting where it was him and Gary Van Dever and Matt Schaefer and Travis Clardy. And Matt Schaefer and Travis Clardy voted against impeachment, and he and Gary Van Dever voted for impeachment. And so everybody was sharing their various views. And he comes in to defend himself from statements Matt Schaefer made about the process. And he comes in to basically say the process was followed well. I back up Chairman Murr and the General Investigating Committee and the work they did. And oh, by the way, I still stand by my vote today, right? The ironic thing is that vote never happened. Let's go to this clip.
We determined whether there was enough evidence to move the ball forward. And I felt like there was. I stand by my vote.
So some of you are likely pretty offended that this thing called ghost voting happens, right? Ghost voting, a vote being cast for a lawmaker who's not there. Now, let me give you an example of where I think that term, a ghost vote, could and would be appropriate. If you are standing there on the floor for 6 hours, right? Or 16 hours on some days, and there's a ton of bills and there's amendments and there's all these things happening. You're present in the Capitol. You have registered that you're there in the morning. You are there in the Capitol, but you have to run to the bathroom. It would make sense that your desk mate would be able to say, hey, there's these 2 bills coming up. And just so you know, a lot of the good lawmakers who actually do their research and whose staff do their research will come with their votes already pre-planned. I know this is a good bill. I know this is a bad bill. And if something happens on the floor that changes their mind, they might change it. But their intentions of how to vote are literally right there at their desk. And so their desk mate will say, go to the bathroom, man. And if these 3 bills get debated and move quicker than while you're in the bathroom, I'll just vote your sheet here. Yes for that bill, no for that bill, yes for that bill. Or let's say, okay, the county judge of one of your counties has come to visit you, or a constituent who really cares about property tax relief. And the next day you're debating property tax relief. And this is somebody who you serve and they're outside the chamber in what we call the lobby pit. Your staff has brought them up to meet with you. And you're just going to run outside and talk to this landowner. Maybe they own some rental properties and they're just making sure you understand how burdensome the property tax burden today is on them. You should be able to run out and talk to that person about the next day's vote while not missing 5 votes that take place, okay? Or 1 vote or 2 votes. So it would make sense that in that situation, your desk mate or the person across from you, or let's say you're in a more conservative group of lawmakers. Maybe your desk mate, because of the way the desks are picked, is a more liberal Republican. So you could go to another conservative Republican and say, hey, can you vote me there? I know there's a couple amendments coming up. I don't even know which amendments they are. So vote me with you and the rest of the conservatives. Great. Run out, right? Talk to your constituent, come back in 10 minutes. So in those situations, you would say, yeah, Luke, I think most of you would agree with me. I'm okay if somebody votes for their colleague in that scenario. But that's not what happened with Cole Hefner. And it's so funny because they really don't care. To them, they should be able to say they're present in the Capitol when they're not in the building. That's crazy. It shouldn't happen. And I do think that as the House starts to reform its ways, just being more honest and transparent is a big push behind the contract with Texas, behind what many of the speaker candidates have said. So to me, this type of practice will be much harder to do in the coming sessions, and that's the encouraging thing. So this report hits. As you can imagine, when that kind of TV story hits, not a great day for a politician. People are texting you about it. People who supported you in the past. Did you really do this? You're having to explain yourself. And in the midst of that, James Frank files for Speaker. I think this all happened within 30 minutes. So, and I don't think that James Frank was planning the KHOU story. I think James just knew he was going to file this day, and KHOU happened to work on this story. Here are a couple things James Frank said. And before I do that, let me explain to you the significance of Chairman Frank filing. 45 incoming Republicans have made it clear. I say 45. I hope that Steve Kennard wins that seat in Plano against Plessa. But I don't think that's a guaranteed win. I think Don McLaughlin is in the leading position in his district, so I count him as a new member. I think we will flip that 33-year held seat by a Democrat, Tracy King in Uvalde. So 45 incoming Republicans have signed a document saying no Democrat chairs and no speaker who will support Democrat chairs, effectively opposing Dade Phelan's reelection. And currently, your 3 speaker candidates, Shelby Slauson, Tom Oliverson, and David Cook, who we'll get to in a minute, all are in that group of 45. And so you have to understand that one of the talking points of Dade Phelan's team that they are using to Austin insiders is, well, that's not 53. It's not enough to select the next speaker in caucus. And we think we'll be able to keep enough people together to prevent anyone from winning the caucus, since Dade can't. And their goal is that nobody wins the caucus, so nobody can say they're the Republican caucus nominee. And then when these guys cut a deal with the Democrats on the floor, it's not against the Republican nominee. This is how bad it's gotten for Dade Phelan's team. They're just hoping to be able to cut a deal with the Democrats against the Republican majority supported candidate, but not the caucus nominated candidate. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's silly. It's a very weak argument, but it's the argument they're making nonetheless. And the perception they want there to be is that outside of these 45 people, everyone else is pretty agreed that we need to not change too much. And we need to keep as much of the current structure in place. So when Chairman James Frank, who's not been with that group, comes out and articulates many of the same frustrations and takes a position on Democrat chairs, it shows that the coalition to reform the House is growing. And it actually hurts the narratives and framing that they're trying to operate in as Dade Phelan's closest cardinals. Here's some excerpts from James Frank's letter to his colleagues in announcing his speaker race. He said, "I would like to share 3 of the biggest changes and improvements I will work to bring to the chamber." Okay. 1, communication. In a body of 150 different members, it is impossible to overstate the importance and need for consistent and clear communication from the Speaker's office about our schedule and priorities, etc. Personal communication must focus on members, but it is also critical that this is clear and personal communication with the Senate, the Lieutenant Governor, and the Governor's office. Relationships don't get better by not talking. I'm not reading his entire letter because we don't have time, but I'm just giving you kind of the meat of it, okay? Every member of the House, this is member empowerment, number 2. Every member of the House serves a district of nearly 200,000 Texans, and every district needs to have a voice in the process. Over time, political processes in every arena, including Texas, tend to gravitate to favor those in power. It is crucial that we review every practice in the House that consolidates power into the hands of the Speaker and find intelligent ways to return these powers to the individual members. While we need to make sure the Speaker's office can continue to perform its necessary organizing function, I would like to engage and empower members to represent their districts regardless of seniority or party. Furthermore, I believe there's a tremendous amount of talent in the House that remains on the sidelines and could be better utilized, both to represent their own districts and to formulate the policies of the state. So he's basically saying, we're going to get away from this kind of frat boy mentality where a couple select few get to make all the decisions. We're going to try to empower members as a whole. The third is floor management. As a part-time legislature, these are Representative Frank's words, as a part-time legislature, most of our members make major sacrifices from business and family to serve as citizen legislators. While special sessions may occasionally be necessary, they should never be the result of poor planning or lack of communication between chambers or the governor's office. One of the changes I believe needs to be made is to have major majority party priority bills passed very early in session. So this is a good indication. Okay, here's the rest of it. It is important for those of us in the majority party to get our highest priority bills through the floor and to the Senate very quickly during session. This will allow us to ensure Republican members can fulfill their promises to their constituents. It will also allow members of both parties to spend the rest of, let me find the second page of this, the rest of the session focused on the 90 to 95% of other bills that our constituents on both sides of the aisle want us to debate and pass. This is the argument that conservatives have been making for a decade. I mean, more than a decade. Hey, we're not asking you to do a lot. When the Texas GOP sets out its priorities, it's saying of the 1,000 or 2,000 votes you'll take, can 10 of them be these 10 bills? It's literally asking for 1% of their time. And they act like you're trying to tell them to move mountains. So Representative Frank in this section is basically acknowledging much of what's in the contract with Texas. They said the priorities need to move first, that we need to get started earlier. Tom Oliverson articulated that on his episode on the Luke Macias show. If you haven't watched the Tom Oliverson interview, I would. this was done back in like March or April. I don't remember, March or April. But go back and look at it or watch it or listen to it because he articulates a lot of these same things. So you'll see that there's this pattern. These are all chairmen under Dade recognizing the same problems. Structure dictates behavior, and the House is poorly structured. The last thing is important. Representative Frank says, an additional issue that has been discussed at length is the issue of whether Republican members should maintain all the chairmanships in the House. I believe we should have only Republican chairs. This will allow significantly more Republican members to participate in leadership roles. I have heard some say that this would exclude 65 people from, quote unquote, the process. This could not be further from the truth. Not being a chair does not exclude members from the process. If it did, then most Republicans would currently also be excluded from the process. And then he makes a note, Texas is one of the only 3 states in the country with minority party chairs. So that is his announcing letter. And again, this does broaden the coalition that is calling for reform, which continues to move things in the right time. I'm going to read you a couple excerpts from David Cook's letter as well. Again, David Cook is from Tarrant County and is somebody who has been in leadership in various fashions. He's on the calendars committee. You're not on calendars committee if you're not part of the leadership team in the Texas House of Representatives. So having him jump into the race again continues to show these are people that have been around the process, who have passed dozens of bills out of the Texas House that are saying something needs to change. So I'm going to read you a couple excerpts from his letter. And his letter is just one big letter. It's not broken out by bullet points. So I might jump around here just a little bit, but I do think it'd be helpful for y'all to hear what he had to say. It's time to ensure, I'm not giving you this from the start, so I'm just pulling out different excerpts from David Cook's letter. It's time to ensure that leadership better reflects the will of the majority party. Thank you. This includes a shift to a Republican committee chair model. However, Democrat members will still have the opportunity to work their bills and see them considered fairly, as preserving the rights of the minority party remains part of facilitating the orderly transaction of business in the Texas House. And that's correct. If a Democrat has a bill that is not some leftist policy that helps better structure some part of Texas code, it should pass. None of us would oppose that. To move forward, this is more of his letter. To move forward in a unified body, we need to foster full participation from all members, not just a privileged few. Notice a pattern between David and James' letter? It's because the problem is seen by all. Okay, this is more of it. The lack of communication between leadership and our caucus has stifled progress and caused frustration among members. Clear, transparent, and fair processes are essential to ensuring that every member has the opportunity to contribute meaningfully. As an intended part-time legislature, we must also be efficient with our time and the time of those who we represent. Legislators are expected to return home and live under the laws we pass, yet that becomes increasingly difficult when time is wasted on unnecessary delays and procedural hurdles. We must reform the process that slow our work and focus on streamlining procedures to ensure we are governing effectively for the people of Texas. So these are things that are very positive, that are moving us forward, and that are moving towards a place where the grassroots and the Senate and the lieutenant governor and the Republican Party of Texas and the attorney general and the agriculture commissioner and conservative organized grassroots activists are at less friction and odds with the Texas House than they currently are. David Cook and James Frank have both started to articulate things that, if implemented, we would all agree would take us in a much better direction and would also allow for far more conservative policy to pass. Because here's the thing. Most of the bills that the Texas House kills would pass if they were on the floor and got a vote. So they have had to design a process to kill policy that a majority of the legislators would vote to pass. And they do so because that's just how they've operated for so long. And they don't know any other way. I've said this before, but we catechize our children in truth, the truth of who God is, the truth of who Christ is, the truth of the accomplished work of Christ on the cross, right? And that is a good thing to do. It would be horrible for us to catechize our children, which, by the way, this is most of the public school system. They catechize your children into many false truths. And they try to convince them of certain things being true that aren't. And with some kids who just get completely indoctrinated, they just don't know any other way to operate. And much of the Republican caucus, many of the members in the Republican caucus who are still with Speaker Dade Phelan are there because they just can't imagine a different way. They have convinced themselves of the lie that they have to have this uniparty coalition that governs in the way the House has governed since Joe Strauss. That's what they're convinced of. And I got a ton of very encouraging and great feedback from a lot of you on our conversation with J.M. Lozano last week. If you did not listen or watch that one, I would greatly encourage you to do so. Because in that, one of my takeaways and encouragements to you is that you need to recognize how much, you need to recognize how many members, if you take the time, might actually be willing to come your way, even if they're not Tony Tinderholt, even if they're not Nate Schatzline, even if they're not Mitch Little or Shelley Luther or some of these other great incoming people. That's what's important to recognize. Now, the other thing that happened yesterday is that Dan Patrick released several additional interim charges. And this is very good because Dade Phelan is doing as little in the interim as possible, while Dan Patrick seems to be moving forward with quite a few more aggressive interim charges. Let me pull these up.
Do you feel increasingly isolated? Like the world has gone insane and you are part of one small, clear-headed remnant? Let me be the first to tell you, you're not alone. I'm Sarah Gonzalez, and on my new show, Come and Take It, I'm going to call out the crazy so you can be empowered to change Texas and the nation. Overcome the schemes of the left designed to keep Texans paralyzed and silent. Watch or listen to Come and Take It today.
The first interim charge the lieutenant governor made was to the Business and Commerce Committee. And again, the Business and Commerce Committee could hear different ideas and policies around different issues, okay? But when the lieutenant governor gives them something, they definitely get to it. Non-compete agreements. This is examining the impact of the Federal Trade Commission's final rule on non-compete agreements on Texas employers. I honestly don't know this issue well enough to tell you why this is a good or bad thing, but that's what it was. The Criminal Justice Committee got an additional charge to look into supporting victims of sexual assault, just collection and processing of rape kits, retail theft, study the effects of organized retail crime in Texas and other states, evaluate the reporting and legislative suggestions from statewide organized retail theft task force, financial crimes, evaluate financial criminal activity trends in Texas, including the fiscal impact on consumers. These are good things as we have increasing retail theft, especially in urban areas. It's good to be looking into those things. Education is improving K-12 college pathways, which is a huge thing. Advanced placement, dual credit course offerings, more of those. Monitoring the implementation of legislation passed in education by the 88th legislature. That's all pretty standard stuff. He has school enrollment trends. He wants to study the post-pandemic student enrollment trends. Very good thing. What has caused the shift in student enrollment, including the rise of homeschooling, micro schools, and other parental choice options. This would be a very good thing for the Senate to look into. And then the Film Commission is going to get looked into. Hopefully that's to stop the Film Commission. I can't guarantee that because a lot of politicians do like us subsidizing more movies, but I hope that they're looking into the Film Commission to defund it. This is where they use your money to write Hollywood money and pay for people to make movies in Texas. Doesn't seem necessary. Protecting vulnerable Texans in emergencies, commercial residential settings for elderly and individuals with intellectual disabilities, including assisted living facilities. These are the type of things that he's saying, hey, I just need you to look more into these. Higher education. We're going to get some red meat. Stopping DEI to strengthen the Texas workforce, and core curriculum course accessibility. This is really good reform in higher education, continuing to kind of crack down on DEI at the higher ed level. In the State Affairs Committee, he's asking them to look into impeachment reform to completely evaluate how we are going to conduct impeachments moving forward. This is fantastic and needs to happen. Runoff elections, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm kind of concerned of the runoff elections section. It looks like what they want to do is consider reducing the 50% threshold needed. This has been, the fact that we have runoffs in Texas has been one of the most effective tools to getting rid of bad incumbent Republicans because they spend so much money, and often incumbents will get 49 or 48 or 47%. And the second, highest challenger to them gets 38. They go to a runoff, and more than 50% of the time that incumbent loses. So if we change the runoff elections, I will tell you, we will have more incumbent Republicans stay in power. That's just my opinion of that section. I will be interested to see kind of what they're looking at. There is a shortening of the runoff time period, which needs to happen. So we'll get into what that looks like. It looks like they are trying to come down on the lottery. The lottery is horrific. And so it looks like they're going to do a little bit there. Unmasking protesters, studying the use of face coverings and hoods designed to conceal the identity of those bent on committing crimes at protests. That I'm very fascinated to see kind of what kind of policy they're looking at. Stop non-citizens from voting, 100%. Cole Hefner took the teeth out of the Senate bill on making it illegal to illegally vote. I've said this a couple times, but I will remind you. The Senate wanted to make it illegal to vote when you can't vote. Okay. So it's illegal to vote illegally. I know that sounds like a weird law to have to make, but that was the deal. It was a crime to vote illegally. Duh. Well, Cole Hefner gutted it to say it's only a crime if you knowingly illegally vote. So if you vote illegally and you're not registered to vote, but when the district attorney comes to prosecute you, you go, I didn't know I couldn't vote. You haven't committed a crime. That's crazy, but that's what Cole Hefner did. And maybe he came up with that idea on some state jet flying somewhere, for all I know. Beverages with THC, evaluating Texas laws to regulate beverages with THC. Honestly, sounds like a potentially good idea. Public trust in government, addressing homelessness, the election audit reports, evaluating the Secretary of State's election audit reports, making recommendations to secure our elections and ensure counties follow the law. These are all good things. So additional work that the Senate is doing, ready to get to work when the session starts. And the House is kind of tinkering around right now, but that is actually a good thing. It's because the House Speaker doesn't know what his path to re-election looks like. And I did say this yesterday or day before when James Frank announced these days are kind of running together at this point. I said, I'm hearing rumors that Dade Phelan is trying to decide who to hire next in response to James Frank's entrance. Dade Phelan, the only thing he's come up with, their entire team's strategy to keeping themselves alive has been to hire big names. So he hired Mike Toomey, who's a lobbyist making $5, $6, $7 million a year, who will take that pay cut to go down to like $200,000 a year to come in as the chief of staff of the speaker. And he will do that for the next 6 months. Now, he's not likely going to be the chief of staff of speaker because Dade Phelan's path to re-election looks rather thin at this moment in time, but he could still win. And if he wins, he's going to have this super high paid lobbyist now running his shop, who also, by the way, is a big pharma lobbyist. He's got all sorts of other problems, but that's okay. Mike Toomey is fine as a lobbyist. If he wants to be a lobbyist and get paid by corporations, and sometimes he's going to fight for the right thing and sometimes the wrong thing, that's what higher gun lobbyists do, but not as the chief of staff of the next speaker of the Texas House. And then that didn't give him enough momentum. Like they kind of like little blip on the radar screen, and then everybody realized Mike Toomey doesn't get to vote, so I don't know what this is going to do for anybody. So a week later, they said, we're hiring Governor Perry. This is actually funny. Governor Perry is volunteering as a senior advisor for Dade Phelan. And the reason I think he's volunteering and not getting paid is so that he can continue to get paid by a lot of other people, because if he's paid as a state employee, he can't get paid as like a legislative consultant for 8 or 9 or 10 different companies that pay him. And so Perry doesn't register as a lobbyist, but everyone knows that he gets paid by all sorts of other interests to speak out on different issues and be a public spokesman for things. So he's still a public spokesman for getting paid by all these corporations to influence the government process. He's also a volunteer senior advisor to the Speaker of the House. And this is just the ideas they have to like give themselves more momentum, right? Because they can't get members of the legislature to say, I'm strongly behind Dade Phelan for re-election, except for Jeff Leach and Jared Patterson on Twitter every other day. And I still do not believe that Jared Patterson or Jeff Leach will actually go to the floor and cut a deal with the Democrats. They just won't do it. They'll tweet about it right now, how Dade's going to be a great speaker, but they know a majority of the caucus is against him. And their gig is going to continue to be harder to portray and play and run the more the momentum builds to reform the legislature. So good things are happening in general. I hope you're encouraged because I am. We need to continue to focus on moving Texas in the right direction because as goes Texas, so goes the nation. It is true. If we are not drawing stark contrasts between us and California every single day on every single issue we can, we are losing out on the opportunity we have to tell all of these patriotic Californians and Washington State and New York residents to come to this state and help us make this state the shining city on the hill that it needs to be. Not only for the nation, but for ourselves and our neighbors, the neighbors whom we are called to love, our children and our children's children. May God bless you and may God bless Texas.
Do you want to get your news from people who share your values? Texas Scorecard, real news for real Texans.